Time flies. Okay. We're in the Sermon on the Mount today. And so, as I slowly but surely take off layers of clothing, okay. We are entering into a wonderful section of text of which we will be spending weeks in. I already know it. The Sermon on the Mount, some have called it the Christian Manifesto. There's just so much stuff to know about it. And I think today we're just going to get a bit of an introduction. We're going to learn about what it is. And a lot of breath, don't mind me. We see here, and seeing the multitudes, he went up on a mountain, and when he was seated, his disciples came to him. So, just checking on some stuff there. We have another account in Luke chapter 6. I'm going to head over there really quickly here. Matthew, Mark, Luke. Luke chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Luke chapter 6. So, in Matthew chapter 4, it talks about him teaching these great multitudes. That's where it ends up. Great multitudes followed him from Galilee, Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and Jordan. And seeing the multitudes, so there's all these people gathering to see him. It says in chapter 5, verse 1, remember, there's no chapter break when Matthew wrote this. He goes up on a mountain, and when he was seated, his disciples came to him. Morning, Tanya. Morning, Susan. And then in Luke, we read that he goes up on a mountain and continued all night in prayer to God. That's Luke chapter 6, verse 12. And when it was day, he called his disciples to himself. He picks them out. And when he came down with them and stood on a level place, which is a plain in the Greek, with a level place with a crowd of his disciples and a great multitude of people from all Judea, the sea of coast of Tyre and Sidon, they came to hear him. What we're going to find is two different sermons with many similar points, but they're two different sermons. And I only emphasize that because, one, there's enough differences. Some have thought, oh, well, maybe the two writers had conflict. He said this thing over here, but Luke says he said that. So obviously only one of them can be right. Well, unless there was two different sermons, one of which was designed for his disciples. The other one was for the multitudes. One of them, he's in a huge group of people, and he decides to go up on a mountain, seemingly to get away from the general masses, to where only his disciples, the ones who truly wanted to learn and grow and follow him, followed him up here. This isn't the 12. Whereas in Luke, he calls the 12, names them, you are the 12, boom. And then he goes down into the plain, he descends a mountain and starts a sermon. So again, these are two different sermons. And it might seem like a small point, but I think it is important. Because the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, which if you want to know the Sermon on the Mount, can I see behind me well enough? No, I can't read behind me. Where are we looking here? This book right here, which you would read as Nomres Ethnicedicits Tehim et No. I don't know why they have to do the reverse camera thing. But the studies in the Sermon on the Mount by the doctor, Martin Lloyd-Jones. I've heard more than one person say that this was the most impactful book they ever read outside of the Bible. And I would agree with them. It is quite the impactful book. And if you go through this book and read it, my oh my, does the doctor break it down. I think it's 60 sermons on the Sermon on the Mount. And it's a thick book. It's a good read. There's like I don't know, 500-600 pages. But all this said, the Sermon on the Mount was intended for believers. This is not a book or a sermon of ethics. It is not a sermon of ways to live. Jesus is taking the bar and he's raising it to an extreme height. And in many ways, he's really showing us how far we fall short from the glory of God. The last verse of chapter 5 says, "Therefore you shall be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect." I mean, you get the drift that he's not necessarily giving us standards which he expects us to keep. Now, that doesn't mean we just discard them. Well, Jesus never expected us to keep that anyway. No, he's showing us the perfection of our holy God. And in light of this, we strive towards it and yet should be humbled, knowing we could never fully achieve it, which keeps us seeking his mercy, seeking his grace. I still think one of the most convicting sections is "But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use and persecute you." And we all know those verses, right? I mean, I'm looking at who's watching. I don't think those are new to any of you guys, right? So then my question is, how obedient are you at those things? Literally, regularly, praying and blessing the people who are the meanest to you and the cruelest, or the ones who don't care about you at all. Are you loving them, blessing them, doing good toward them, praying for them? And I just throw this out. It's just, to me, it reminds me, man, I fall short. And it helps me never think more full of myself than I should. Jesus sits down and he teaches his disciple. And for what it's worth, do note that he teaches. And we mentioned this yesterday, right? Verse 2, "Then he opened his mouth and taught them, saying." So he's going to open his mouth and he's going to teach them. And this is what you do with disciples. You teach them, you equip them so that they know what they ought to do in this world. When I did this section of text, the Sermon on the Mount, when we started the church, which is now Calvary Ellensburg, we started as a home group, and the very first text we went through was the Sermon on the Mount. And we spent one night on each of the Beatitudes, of the 8 Beatitudes coming up. And so whether we're going to spend one morning on each, I don't know. You definitely can. But there's a beautiful progression there. And so this was just an overview day of the Sermon on the Mount that is to come, so that we understand what it is. It was a message to disciples. You're going to notice that what Jesus says to disciples is very different from what he says to unbelievers. And that's, I think, important for us to remember, that our message to unbelievers should be very different from our message to believers. Unbelievers, they need to be convicted of their sins so that they repent and turn to God, whereas believers need to be exhorted to go forward and do the things they know they ought to do. You know, there's different messages there. So all this said, it's a short introduction, and I'm excited for the Sermon on the Mount. This should be a good time. So God bless you guys. Have an amazing weekend. We'll be doing Gog and Magog Sunday night at our church. And Sunday morning, I think we've got a wonderful treat as well, really just looking at why God made you. And I don't mean people, I mean you. What's your purpose in God's plan? All right, that's enough for now. God bless you guys. Have an amazing day. And I'll see you later.